Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second webinar for Red Squirrel Awareness Week. I hope you're taking this opportunity to share lots of Red Squirrel knowledge, stories and images to raise awareness and encourage action. If you missed yesterday's excellent webinar on genetics and health with the University of Edinburgh's Red Squirrel research team, it's now available on our YouTube channel with lots of other interesting videos. But today is our annual Red Squirrel conservation update from each of the 4 countries across the UK. Mike Denbury joins us from Red Squirrels Northern England, Nicole Still from Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels, Katy Bell from Ulster Wildlife, and Chris Tucker from Natural Resources Wales. Each of our speakers will give presentations, and then there is a Q&A session at the end for all your many questions that you might want to ask. But if you can keep your questions for the panelists to the Q&A section of Zoom, that'd be really appreciated rather than getting potentially lost amongst the general chat. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you'll just find the Q&A function there. You can click on it and add any of your questions in there. And feel free to use the chat function for any general discussions amongst yourselves. Excellent. Well, that said, I will hand over to our first speaker, who has volunteered to be Mike Denbury, covering activities in England.
Thank you, Kay. I'll just share my screen with everyone.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Mike.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. I'm here today to give the update for England on red squirrels. I have quite a few slides. There's a lot of stuff to go through. As Kay mentioned, we do have a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions or would like further information on anything that I mention, we can certainly give you links and updates at the end. So red squirrels in England. I suppose you should start by actually addressing some of the threats to red squirrels and the need for red squirrel conservation. On the left here, we have a recently published map collated by the Mammal Society showing the grey squirrel range in England. And this is taken with data from 2017 to 2022. We can see that the majority of England is now only grey squirrels, with the northern region and a few isolated pockets having red and grey squirrels. The main threat is obviously posed through competition for food, but also through the transmission of disease, such as the squirrelpox virus. The map on the right is by the APHA and shows over the last 40 years where squirrelpox has been reported. This is obviously a constant threat and something that we need to strive to try and avoid. There are a number of projects and schemes going on to try and address that balance. Recently, I've been involved with another of other stakeholders in helping to create the Mammal Society and Natural England's Threatened Species Recovery Actions for England. These hope to set out strategies in which red squirrel conservation can be attained, and links quite nicely with the work that's going on the local nature recovery strategies. Each region in England is undertaking work, mainly led by the local county councils, to create spatial strategies that will ensure identify areas of red squirrels, identify the threats posed to them, and also create specific actions that will help with their conservation. Also underway, the Institute of Zoology and Natural England, the UK Squirrel Accord, are creating a conservation strategy for red squirrels. At the moment, they're undertaking some modelling, which has been based on a number of workshops they've undertaken recently. And that is hoped that by 2025, they'll be able to produce a strategy which can be rolled out across England, which will help us to focus our efforts. Now, looking at some local areas, an update from the Isle of Wight. In the Isle of Wight, there have been a slight reduction in the number of red squirrel sightings in the last year. There are 1,568 sightings this year. And as ever, monitoring is important. And the White Squirrel Project does encourage everyone to try and share sightings with them via their website. One of the issues that they have been encountered is the use of rat poison. And Helen Butler from the White Squirrel Project has been liaising with a number of stakeholders to try and close some loopholes around the use of poisons. Also, good news that they've received funding and now have actually secured 12 acres of woodland, which they are now focusing on red squirrel conservation effort. Slightly less good news was that recently a body of a grey squirrel was washed up on the Isle of Wight. This is concerning. Whether the grey squirrel was undertaking a brave attempt to swim to the Isle of Wight is unknown, but it does highlight the threat posed to isolated island populations. It does also highlight the need to undertake more and focused grey squirrel control on the actual mainland to prevent this type of incursion. The need to protect existing populations of red squirrels is not solely isolated to these islands, and it is something that is felt across the rest of the country, especially in areas where we have red squirrels, such as in the north. It is important that we extend our reach, going into areas where only grey squirrels exist, in order to prevent incursion and also create new space and new habitat for red squirrels to expand into. One example of this work in outlying areas is the new pilot project, which is funded by the Forestry Commission and managed by the UK Squirrel Accord, which now has 2 red squirrel officers who work in North Yorkshire, Lancashire, and County Durham, trying to connect with landowners, encourage them into schemes, trying to support local volunteer groups and create new volunteer groups. It's an ambitious task. They're covering over 450,000 hectares of land. They've been delivering a number of engagement events and reaching out to over 1,000 individuals, increasing awareness and gaining support for those undertaking red squirrel conservation. They've also helped to establish 4 new volunteer groups in the project area, which is really important if we're to sustain the effort required. As a side note, some of you may well be aware that the UK Squirrel Accord has released a new leaflet, which is available to download from the resource library, which is an excellent engagement tool if you're out speaking to people or want to find out further information about the threats posed by grey squirrels and red squirrel conservation. In order for us to protect red squirrels, a key challenge is obviously funding, and the more people we can get undertaking grey squirrel management, the more chance red squirrel conservation has. When it comes to funding, one of the key roles that project officers and everyone can undertake is trying to liaise with landowners and get them to utilise schemes such as the Countryside Stewardship Scheme in England. The WS3 option provides funding specifically for grey squirrel management. Currently, the scheme provides £60 per hectare for woodland owners to employ people or engage volunteer groups to undertake the control of grey squirrels. If anyone is interested in this, they should contact any of the organisations present today, but also the Forestry Commission woodland officers are a great place to start. Now, throughout England as a whole, the main driver for grey squirrel control is the protection of trees. In a recent survey by the APHA, over 500 trees and 12 trees and 12 woodlands, over half of the trees exhibited squirrel damage, with a high portion of this being hazel, oak, beech, and sycamore. This is ongoing research, but it indicates that populations where densities are fewer than 4 squirrels per hectare stand less chance of seeing significant damage. Currently, we're waiting on news for what will be on offer next year with the Woodland Improvement Grant, and we're hoping that it will be similar to this year. So if there's anyone who's listening who has a woodland or knows people who have woodlands, I strongly advise you to contact your local woodland officer and try and gain some support for the conservation work required. A key part of the Woodland Improvement Grant is it encourages people to undertake training. Training is an important part of red squirrel conservation, and there are a number of training courses available for people who wish to learn more about the need for grey squirrel management. Two courses, for example, are the Northern Red Squirrels course and the British Red Squirrels Lancer courses. Both of these provide an excellent introduction to grey squirrel management, and although lots of people out there will be familiar with the work that they're doing, there are lots of different things that these courses cover that people may not be aware of. A good example of this is ways in which we can reduce the threat from transmission of squirrel pox through the cleaning of feeders and not using feeders in areas where we have both red and grey squirrels. I would advise anyone who is interested in these courses to contact the organisations mentioned. But to date, over 1,000 people have received training from British Red Squirrels and Northern Red Squirrels combined. So in order for us to identify where the red squirrel populations are and to try and focus effort on where conservation and action is needed, one of the things that we undertake in Red Squirrels Northern England is a spring monitoring programme. This is an ambitious programme which is run from March to May every year, and it's a huge collaboration effort. We try and identify as many areas with red squirrels and grey squirrels. The monitoring does not record the number of squirrels at each location, but it does give us invaluable information with regards to where the squirrels are. The results from 2024 are in, and we're currently finalising the report, which will be published on the RSNE website shortly. So if you want further information on that, please keep an eye on our website. While the report isn't finished, we have actually got the summary. Now this year, we surveyed with the help of volunteers and members of staff, we surveyed over 246 sites. There were 150 different people involved. And the results this year have identified a slight increase in red squirrel numbers, or the number of sites that had red squirrels. It has also identified a rather dramatic increase in the number of sites where grey squirrels are present. If we compare this to previous year's monitoring, we can actually see this significant rise in grey squirrel numbers. It's about a 6.8% rise over last year, which is a disturbing result. And if we consider this and look at the trend, if we can estimate that in 5 years, all of the sites we are surveying will have grey squirrels present. This significantly increases the risk of squirrel pox virus and other diseases being transmitted. So it is an ever greater concern. What the survey has shown is that red squirrel in sites where there are red squirrels is remaining relatively stable. There's a slight increase over last year's figures, but a slight decrease from the year before. I think the key takeaway from this is that red squirrel distribution, while seeming to be held stable, is only done so because of the massive amount of work that is being undertaken to control grey squirrel numbers and improve red squirrel habitat in the areas where these red squirrels exist. But our spring survey is only a snapshot. It enables us to compare year on year. But what isn't also important is the ongoing monitoring that is being undertaken. We're seeing some interesting results, and we are seeing red squirrels actually moving from areas where they have high numbers of red squirrels into areas that they've previously only been grey squirrels. A good example of this is Northern Yorkshire and Lancashire. and also into the western regions of Durham. The red squirrels appear to be moving along wooded riparian corridors, and these can form key routes for red squirrels to expand their range. Right. The map you're seeing is a map of 2023, and these are sites where red squirrels were reported. Obviously, these are only areas where work was undertaken, so it is dependent on the results we receive. RSNE works with a number of different organisations, but also with a number of volunteer groups to actually gain these information. And it is vital that we can receive information from so many people because it enables us to have this landscape picture of where red squirrels are. Speaking of the people undertaking the monitoring and recording, I have to mention the amazing efforts of the volunteer communities out there who are undertaking day-to-day red squirrel conservation. A good example of this is Northern Red Squirrels, and if you go to their website, you'll be able to see where their local group is near you. But the volunteer groups do face a number of challenges. In a recent survey we undertook of 217 people, the top 5 challenges identified were a lack of public awareness, not enough volunteers undertaking grey squirrel management, finances and funding, and a difficulty recruiting volunteers. It is hoped that with support, the volunteers can find the funding they need, and through national programmes focusing on engagement and strategies to conserve the red squirrels, we can try and readdress these figures. One project is currently underway is the Red Squirrel Recovery Network. This is a Heritage Lottery funded project, and currently it is in the development stage. A final application will be going to the lottery in November. But this project is a partnership between Northumberland Wildlife Trust, Cumbria Wildlife Trust, Lancashire Merseyside Wildlife Trust, and partners in Scotland, including Bright Green Nature, with the intention of focusing on the cross-border conservation of red squirrels and red squirrels in isolated areas such as in Merseyside. The project hopes to raise awareness and support in all of the areas identified in the project. It also is engaging with the Plant Health Agency, which will undertake large-scale field trials of the contraceptive delivery method. I think this is a key thing that will help support the efforts that are being undertaken across the whole of England. This project will actually be working across the border in southern Scotland as well, and will support existing and hopefully new volunteer groups. It'll provide opportunities for local communities to engage with red squirrels, increasing the awareness and support of red squirrel conservation. That's very much a quick summary of red squirrel conservation currently in England. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A session at the end. But for now, thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you very much, Mike. Lots of things going on. And now we will pass over to Nicole from Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and thank you, Mike. So similar to Mike, I'm going to try and squeeze a lot of information into just a few slides here. So similar to Mike, I'm happy to take any questions afterwards. There we go.
Yeah, that looks good. Thank you.
Right. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels, we are a partnership project led by the Scottish Wildlife Trust that works alongside the statutory agencies in Scotland, as well as several other conservation organisations. to deliver strategic control and community engagement throughout Scotland on red squirrel conservation. Currently, we're funded by the Nature Restoration Fund in a 2-year project that started in March of this year and will extend into April of 2026. While selfishly, I'm going to try and focus quite a bit on the work that our project does, I will touch base where I can on some of the other work that's happening through partners and other stakeholders across Scotland. So the project itself has been working across Scotland since 2009. In Scotland, a bit different from England and some of the other home countries, our red squirrel conservation is very much led from the perspective of conserving the species rather than as a forestry issue. This is large in part due to the continued existence of red squirrel populations in Scotland. Mike shared the map earlier of the distribution changes across the UK. As it stands currently, Scotland is home to about 80% of the mainland UK's remaining red squirrel populations. The Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project has been delivering on the Scottish strategy for red squirrel conservation since 2017. And that strategy has a 2-pronged approach to red squirrel conservation that focuses primarily on strategic grey squirrel control, where we know it can be the most effective, as well as engaging the community in red squirrel conservation efforts. However, those aren't the only pieces of that strategy. So partners also work across the country to deliver other elements of that strategy, including expanding red squirrel ranges through translocations and reintroductions. That work's carried out by our partners at Trees for Life in the Highlands, as well as habitat management within both stronghold forests and via forest management guidelines, as well as supporting schemes for landowners to carry out their own grey squirrel control through things like the Scottish Forestry's Forestry Grant Scheme. That work is managed and carried out by our partners at Forestry Land Scotland, as well as Scottish Forestry. And then we also have pieces within the strategy very much focused on improving our understanding of key research questions. In Scotland, a lot of those questions center around pine martens as well as squirrel pox. That work, as well as the monitoring, apologies, and data collection that informs that work, has been carried out to date by our partners at the Royal Dick Veterinary Hospital, as well as the Morden Institute. And increasingly, particularly in the Central Lowlands, is supported by the Eastern Lowlands Red Squirrel Group. I'll come on a bit more to some of the work that we've been doing there. And this joined up approach has been very useful in helping us to respond to red squirrel conservation issues across the country in a strategic, coordinated way. In the past year, it's been quite an exciting year for us for various reasons, and particularly in the Central Lowlands. We had the first case of a red squirrel contracting the squirrel pox virus north of the Central Belt in Scotland. I'll come on to this more later on, but this work was very much able to have a quick and effective response due to those partnerships with the Royal Dick Veterinary School, as well as the Eastern Lowlands Red Squirrel Group and Fife Red Squirrel Group, who were able to carry out a lot of the work in response on the ground. We were also able to respond to novel grey squirrel sightings in several areas throughout the northern bits of Scotland, including the Isle of Seal and parts of the Highlands. And we've also had some really interesting work come out that I think you heard about yesterday around the genetic health of the red squirrel population in Scotland. All of this work, along with the long history of SSRS's involvement, has helped us to think strategically about what might be on the horizon for red squirrel conservation in Scotland. And we're hoping that that will all be included in a new strategy for red squirrel conservation in Scotland. Similar to England, the Scottish Squirrel Group, which is a partnership group convened by NatureScot, is currently in the process of revising that 2015 Scottish strategy for red squirrel conservation on the timeline of delivering a 2025 strategy. Different from the existing strategy that will take a much longer term approach with a 50-year vision for red squirrel conservation in Scotland, but continue to be delivered on a 10-year timeline. As part of that process, SSRS has fed in various recommendations alongside the recommendations of our partners to feed into that strategy. for a more ambitious approach to red squirrel conservation across Scotland. That includes taking some of the key lessons that we've learned in Aberdeen and the successes that we've had with the project there that I'll come to in a bit, to be more ambitious in both eradicating that remaining population in Aberdeen, but also embedding long-term monitoring to avoid recolonization. We've also made the recommendations that those lessons learned and models that have been developed can help us to deploy those models and isolate other urban populations of gray squirrels that impact our red squirrel conservation strategy on the whole. This should particularly be focused on what is a key East Coast incursion corridor, which serves as the primary transmission for both red and gray squirrels between the central lowlands of Scotland and the Highlands. We've also made the recommendations for a more ambitious approach to our Highland Line control zone with more density-dependent control and the development of monitoring networks further north to help shift the Highland Line further south. In the south of Scotland, we've also suggested more ambitious approaches, including working collaboratively with the folks in Northern England and some of the work that Mike has highlighted to reduce grey squirrel densities and the threat of squirrel pox, as well as to further embed community-led conservation in sustainable ways. These recommendations have helped to inform not just what we hope to achieve on the long term in Scotland, but very specifically what the project and partners are delivering over the next 2 years in the much shorter term. So, as I mentioned earlier, we entered into a new 2-year project funding phase in March of this year. Just to highlight a few of the changes in operations that came along with that shift. So in Aberdeen, we've been working to extensively monitor the grey squirrel population that remains in Aberdeen City, but also to expand our rapid response network in that area and remove any remaining grey squirrels. That's going to rely on the development and deployment of various novel both detection and removal strategies to achieve that big eradication aim. We've also been supporting and are aiming to expand community-led rapid response monitoring networks across the Highland Line. That's that central region running from the west coast in Helensburgh out to the Mearns area in the east coast. And that's very much to prevent further northward incursion, as well as being more ambitious about our work within that Highland Line area, from eradicating grey squirrels from the islands of Loch Lomond in the Trossachs National Park to carrying out more density-dependent control and higher density populations within our control zone. We've also looked to evaluate how we monitor for the squirrel pox spread throughout the central lowlands and working very closely with our partners in the Eastern Lowlands Red Squirrel Group to more strategically monitor and evaluate the threats posed by further expansion of the virus. In the south of Scotland, we have had a reduction in capacity. However, we are continuing to provide knowledge training and community hub support to our volunteer groups and local red squirrel delivery partners, as well as to continue to provide targeted professional control where we know it can do the most good against the threat of squirrel pox and further grey incursion. We're also working to institutionalize that professional support through community-led coordinated control within those priority areas. Now, I mentioned grey squirrel control quite a lot there. Just as a quick brief for anyone that's maybe not as familiar with this component of our work, it is quite central to the Scottish strategy and the work that's carried out in Scotland because of the imminent threats of grey squirrels to the remaining red squirrel population. Similar to other places in the UK, we do uphold welfare as the most important component in carrying out our grey squirrel control. In Scotland, this control is carried out across the landscape by trained professional staff, such as our squirrel officers, as well as volunteers and landowners who have been trained currently through a Basque course provided by Forestry and Land Scotland, and landowners who are under contract with the Forestry Grant Scheme, which is quite similar to the WS3 scheme that Mike mentioned earlier. Because of the existing red population throughout Scotland, our control methods very much focus on live trapping. We also carry out free shooting where we have the appropriate licensing and skills, And where appropriate, we do make sure that we are testing for squirrel pox on those dispatched gray squirrels. A few pieces to also highlight is that there are additional regulations and legislation that impact gray squirrel control in Scotland, in addition to the red squirrel population and the risk of cross-control impacts. Specifically, we have the Air Weapons and Licensing Act in Scotland, which classes air weapons as a firearm in Scotland and dictates where and how they can be used, as well as the new Wildlife Management and Burn Act, which will come into effect in the coming months and will impact the use and regulations around specifically spring traps, such as the canyon models that many of our volunteers might use. Now, I'm very quickly going to run through some of the things that the project has been doing over the past year to give a snapshot of what we have going on. Oops, the wrong button there. Across the country. So on the project-wide scheme, as I mentioned, we do a lot of this work through the Community Hub. This collects squirrel sightings as well as provides resources and a way to import and share data amongst our volunteer groups and independent operators and volunteers. This helps us to collect those sightings, as I mentioned, with nearly 17,000 squirrel sightings of both red and gray squirrels collected across the country last year. And we've also been working to increase the data availability and operational use of some of that data, both sightings, control, and monitoring that's used, and integrating with Esri systems for better dashboards and data collection and use down the road. That includes things like our feeder box and better monitoring data, as well as some more detailed monitoring of our pox monitoring work across the country. Now, jumping through a quick whistle-stop tour of our project areas. As many of you will be familiar with the work that's done in the Northeast. In the Northeast of Scotland, we have an isolated population of grey squirrels. These were all introduced in a single introduction event back in 1971. The project, as I mentioned earlier, has been operating since 2009 and has since removed over 10,000 grey squirrels from Aberdeen. We're now faced with record low both detections and captures in the area, and are very much aiming for an ambitious urban eradication of the remnant population. If it's successful, this will be the first mainland urban eradication of an invasive grey squirrel population. To give you a bit of a picture of what we're looking at just at the moment, you can see back in 2009, we had grey squirrels across the Dee and the Don throughout most of Aberdeen City. This year, we have had just 12 detections of grey squirrels across the entirety of Aberdeen City. That's an incredible reduction, and it means our staff are now faced with what will likely be the most challenging part of the work that they've done to date. The good news is that this has also come on the back of a return of reds all the way into the very city center of Aberdeen, with several cases of confirmed red squirrel sightings very much in the heart of the urban downtown areas of Aberdeen this past year. The models in which we've been able to carry out this work have very much evolved, particularly over the last 4 years, moving to an entirely rapid response monitoring approach. This is carried out by posting feeders with hair sample collection stickies throughout Aberdeen. Those are then evaluated by staff and volunteers, and where we have a grey squirrel detection, we implement a rapid monitoring and trapping response. We have an extensive network and continuing to grow that network across Aberdeen of those feeder boxes. And that's allowed us to carry out over 7,000 feeder box checks in Aberdeen City alone. As it stands this year, as I mentioned earlier, we have had only 12 detections of grey squirrels to date. 7 of those have come from those feeder boxes that I've highlighted, and a further 5 sightings that were reported by the public. In comparison, we've had over 1,000 getting on for 2,000 red squirrel detections at those same feeders and carried out about 5,000 feeder box checks to date. The project has also not been able to remove a single grey squirrel from Aberdeen this year. However, we do know, based on those detections, that there is still a population in the city. We know that we have disrupted both their dispersal and reproductive behaviors in significant ways. And we're working closely with our partners at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland to undertake a genetic analysis to better understand the population size that we have, as well as to help identify individuals and improve the work. This is coming alongside various developments of novel detection and removal processes, including detection dogs and various other novel methods to help us achieve that big aim of eradication. Moving further south, I mentioned our Highland Line. This extends from Helensburgh in the west coast all the way across into the northern Mearns region of the east coast. This covers the frontier population of red and grey squirrels in Scotland. And historically, this effort has very much focused on targeting the lowest density populations and monitoring to limit the further spread of squirrel pox through the central lowlands. While it's not as flashy or quite as exciting as the work in Aberdeen, the long-term containment of that Highland Line control zone is in itself very much a success of the project. And there's now a long-standing commitment from Scottish Government and the statutory agencies that work needs to continue in the long term. Unlike in the work in Aberdeen, this area focuses on a more traditional approach to operational monitoring and control. And while this isn't the best picture because we've had quite a few staffing vacancies in the last 2 years, and this data only goes up to June of this year, and we suspect that these numbers will almost double from the last quarter now that we have an increased staffing complement across the whole of the Highland Line. We do carry out a pretty comprehensive approach to density-dependent control. So what you're seeing here shows the number of trapping and pre-bait days that are carried out by staff and volunteers across the Highland Line in the last year or so. And then you can see, based on how dark blue these squares are, how many gray squirrels were controlled in those areas, with the darkest blue areas being the most gray squirrels controlled. And you can see that we have an increased variation in the densities of gray squirrel populations that we've been able to manage. This is all part of our work for the first stages of ambitiously moving the Highland Line. Quite a few pieces of work will need to happen, and this is very much part of a long-term strategy. But the first stages of that are the increase of rapid response networks, particularly along key incursion routes of that Highland Line area, allowing us to better target higher density populations further south and even south of that line. Moving to the south of Scotland, as has been highlighted, similar to Northern England, we have very high density grey squirrel populations that seem to be continuing to rise throughout the south of Scotland. They face incursion both from the central belt of the grey-only population in Scotland, as well as from grey squirrels incurring from Northern England. We have 10 priority areas of red squirrel conservation, or the parks, which you see reflected in the south of this map. And these are covered by 17 now fully independent volunteer groups across the south of Scotland. Those volunteers, along with staff and participating estates involved with the forestry grant scheme, have removed over 32,000 grey squirrels from the south of Scotland in 2017. However, they continue to face increasing numbers, and similar to the challenges that Mike highlighted, face the challenges of funding cycles and insufficient support from resource and both capacity perspectives. So as I mentioned, we have 17 now fully independent volunteer groups that are spread across those priority areas, and they contribute a significant part of the control work that's carried out across the south of Scotland. This is still supported by limited professional control capacity. So you can see here the areas where both staff and volunteers have been carrying out control in the last 2 years, and the return in the grey densities that they've been able to call in those areas. We continue to support staff in the Nith Valley, as well as the Annan Valley and the Northern Tweed Valley, and have been able in the last year to increase control capacity in the Solway Forest region in the very south. Those areas have been highlighted because we know that they face the biggest risk of squirrel pox. Mike touched on this a bit, but for those that might not be familiar, this is a fatal virus that's carried by gray squirrels. and is deadly and lethal to our red squirrel populations. As it stands, gray squirrel control is the only effective mitigation measure we have, and that's because gray squirrels are the host carrier for the virus. The virus is not as widespread across Scotland, so it was first introduced back in 2005, with the first case in a red squirrel not until 2007 near Lockerbie. And you can see with these dark red dots where we have had confirmed sightings and cases of squirrel pox in the south of Scotland. These are also the areas where we have prioritized our professional control that work closely with the volunteers to make sure that we can mitigate the impacts of those. In the last 2 years, we've had over 18 confirmed cases of squirrel pox virus in red squirrels. Most of those have been focused around the Tweed Valley, as well as the Solway, Annan, and Nith Valley. Oops, sorry. Which do, of course, align with where I mentioned we continue to support professional control. I mentioned earlier that we've also had our first case of squirrel pox north of the Central Belt. So since 2013, the project and partners have been carrying out strategic monitoring across the Central Lowlands to monitor the spread of the squirrel pox virus through the Central Belt gray population. That's done through antibody testing and supported by the Morden Institute. This past year, in the spring, as I mentioned earlier, we had the first confirmed case of red squirrels contracting the virus north of that Central Belt line. That happened just outside of Dunfermline. And I'm happy to report that we were able to respond very quickly with public engagement, as well as very strategic work that was carried out by the Eastern Lowlands Group for both effective monitoring and control in some of the key areas to mitigate the impacts on the wider Fife population. We haven't had any further cases reported of pox. However, we are very much reevaluating our monitoring strategy in light of this new development. So wrapping up, there's lots of things on the horizon, very much informed by the work that's happening right now and has happened over the last year. As I've mentioned, we are looking at an increase in pox monitoring and control efforts across the Central Lowlands with our partners in the Eastern Lowlands Red Squirrel Group, as well as others to help respond to this new emerging threat, as well as significant changes in the operational delivery and support and funding mechanisms across Scotland. These will very much be underpinned by quite a bit of legislation and strategy that's undergoing change in Scotland, from the new strategy for red squirrel conservation, as well as a new Scottish invasive non-native species strategy, which is also due in the next year. This will be further underpinned by revisions and an overhaul of our forestry grant scheme, which is due in 2026. In the shorter term, just to highlight some of the other work that we have going on this week, in addition to it being Red Squirrel Awareness Week across Scotland, it's also our Great Scottish Squirrel Survey. There's, for those of you joining from Scotland or that might be in Scotland later this week, lots of opportunities to get involved, from as simple as just reporting your squirrel sightings to attending one of our various events held by ourselves and partners throughout the country. And with that, I will thank you and hand back over to you today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nicole. We look forward to the publishing of the new Scotland strategy next year. And do please, if you are in Scotland or going to Scotland this week, do get involved in the Great Scottish Squirrel Strategy. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll pass over to Katy in Northern Ireland.
Thanks, Kay. Share here.
That looks good. Thank you, Katy.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Katy Bell. I work as Senior Conservation Officer for Ulster Wildlife. So Ulster Wildlife is part of the bigger Wildlife Trusts movement, and Ulster Wildlife covers the whole of Northern Ireland. So we do a range of things across the country. So we protect wildlife havens, and we have 19 nature reserves. We work to bring people closer to nature, and we save wildlife. So the red squirrel work and the species work kind of goes under the wildlife one, but it actually covers pretty much everything we do. And everything we do is kind of underpinned by our strategy for nature, people and climate. And we've been working on red squirrels for a number of years within that. So talk about what we've been doing. So this year is a survey year. So we monitor the 3 species, grey squirrel, red squirrel and pine marten across Northern Ireland. This has been undertaken since 2014 and taken over by Ulster Wildlife in 2017. So this is really great to get a long-term data set on these species and to see what's happening. So we had released results from 2022. We do this every 2 years on a wide scale, and we're in the midst of it at the minute, so we've got a couple more months to get all of the data. So this is my colleague Ross showing how much he loves squirrel surveying. So why do we do that? Well, we have a red squirrel strategy for Northern Ireland, and all of the work we do really, you know, feeds into that. And one of the reasons is monitoring is really important to you know, look at the population distribution over time. It allows us to be vigilant of any changes. So if grey squirrels pop up in somewhere we didn't know they were, or red squirrels have moved somewhere, and it kind of informs our conservation work on a local and a landscape scale. So this is really important, and we get a lot of important data from this. So we've had a number of people helping us, and thank you to everyone that's been surveying so far. This is some of our staff on our peatland team that we've roped into doing some squirrel work, but we've had a number of staff members, red squirrel groups, volunteers help us with this, so this is really invaluable. This is what we're kind of aiming for. This was the coverage and the input in 2022. So you can see the kind of different number of people that took part in this. So thank you to all of them. And we're trying to aim for that this year. So if anyone that hasn't taken part wants to, please let us know. But we really couldn't do it without them. You see, we do a lot of it ourselves, but not all of it. And it's really important to get other volunteers and groups involved in this and try and get a wide as coverage as possible of the whole country, so we can find out what's going on with the squirrels. So a few nice little things that have been coming through so far. I just thought I'd share this little pregnant red squirrel because it was just, yeah, lovely. And this, you know, of course we get the main purpose of the project is presence absence, and we find out what's going on across the country, but we also find out little tidbits of information, like this was a site we didn't know red squirrels were breeding at, and now we do, so that was lovely to be able to find that. We are also getting a large number of pine martens on the survey. So we did share last year our 2022 results, and this was kind of widespread. We got a lot on the news about this, and really we showed a huge kind of resurgence in pine marten from 2017 to 2022. Pine martens had doubled in the number of woodlands we recorded them in. So we're intrigued to see if that's still happening, you know, if they've stabilized or if they're still increasing. But they are doing well. In 2022, they were actually our most recorded species, so that was really interesting. So at the minute, this is kind of what it's looking at. Now this is just so far, we haven't got all of the data in by any means, but you can see quite a steady increase in the presence absence of pine marten across the country, and we haven't got all the results in so far, but it's still looking quite good. You know, over 60 woodlands we've recorded pine marten in, so that's very interesting. I'm not going to go into the whole pine marten, grey squirrel, red squirrel relationship, but there's loads of data out there, lots of information. A lot of studies have been done in both Ireland and Scotland, so that is available for anyone that's interested in that. But we have been seeing a bit of grey squirrel retraction in areas where there are high densities of pine marten. So on top of our proper kind of long-term monitoring, we also take sightings. So this kind of informs our conservation action as well when we look at both of the things together. So we have a database where we collect data. Now this also gets shared with CEDAR, our recording body for Northern Ireland, and it also gets shared with the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. But this is really important, so if anyone has any sightings of either grey squirrel, red squirrel, or pine marten, please let us know. So this is kind of what it's looking like now. This is a couple of days ago. I took a screenshot of the database and where the sightings are coming from. So this gives us a good idea of what's kind of happening with these two species. You can just see the faint kind of little brown squares are the pine marten, and they're slightly more sensitive records, so they're you can't see them just as well. But One of the good things that all this data is showing is Fermanagh is still grey squirrel free. So you can see kind of out here in the west, that's the county of Fermanagh for those not familiar with Northern Ireland, and that's still grey squirrel free, which is great. So actually we have red squirrels in 6 counties and grey squirrels in only 5 of the counties in Northern Ireland. But of course you can see the huge kind of source populations of greys coming out of Belfast City and around Lough Neagh, and a lot of the reds maybe exist around the borders historically, but then we can see them kind of starting to move into County Tyrone and Omagh, which is a really positive sign. So this is one thing we have been noticing from our data. We've seen more pine martens turn up in this area, and we've seen a retraction of greys. We also have a number of people and organisations carrying out control in various areas as well, and that's another thing that we do. We've been working closely with councils across Northern Ireland to try and get control undertaken in key areas where it hasn't been historically. So you can maybe see Derry, Londonderry up at the top here. That's one area that control unfortunately wasn't undertaken in key areas, and we've lost some reds from this city centre. This was really one of the last kind of urban populations of our reds, so this just shows the real importance of control in certain areas and people kind of being on board with that. So we did a call last year and we're doing a call again. We have a bit of a dearth of record, not so many from certain areas. So both County Tyrone and County Armagh, we weren't getting as many records in. So we did a call for this last year and we actually got a big increase in records. So this just kind of shows, sometimes we think it's maybe the area is not as populated, we don't have as many records from there, but whenever we do a call out we get more records, so it shows the power of that. So we are doing another call out this week for this area to see if we can increase the records, because there's still some pockets of the country where we don't know as much about what is going on. We have got some funding from PowerNI, which is a local company, so they've been able to give us some money towards our species work, and one of the things we've done with that is produce these signs. So we've just started trying to get these up. So it's basically, our plan is to have this QR code on a lot of walks around Northern Ireland, so when people are kind of leaving or joining a walk and they've seen a squirrel, they can record it in real time. So we've just got a few up at our nature reserve so far, and then we're planning on getting more up. So I think this will be really valuable and hopefully will increase the number of people actually recording squirrels. As part of that partnership, we took the staff of PowerNI out on a lovely red squirrel walk in our nature reserve in Glenarm and managed to see a red squirrel within 5 minutes of walking into the beautiful oak woodland, so that was positive. They've also helped us with a few things for Red Squirrel Week, but one of the main things we do as well is we work very closely with all of the squirrel groups, so they do a lot of great work across Northern Ireland. There are 14 groups in total, which is amazing. You can see the coverage of Northern Ireland and how well covered we are, and some of these groups do amazing things. And I suppose just to highlight, Mike mentioned this as well, just that a lot of the volunteer groups do face challenges and they're trying to do this all in their own spare time. But one of the things from talking to our groups is that they're struggling to get new members and new people that can actually go out and do things. So I'll put a link in the chat after if anyone here is interested in joining a local red squirrel group in Northern Ireland. On top of our sightings database, we have a grey squirrel management database. So this is basically for the groups to be able to put in and see their control effort. Now this is not public, this is just for us and them to see. Now there's just 3 of the groups doing this now. We're speaking to more, hopefully we'll get more data. This data is really important. It shows kind of how much effort some of these groups are putting in, volunteer hours, and as well it gives us really important information about how many squirrels have been taken out of that area and what that means for red squirrels in the area. So this is really important each of the groups can access their own data and be able to look at you know, graphs and whatever they want to use that data for. Hopefully even that'll help, you know, maybe get them funding and things like that. So this is something we're trying to roll out a bit more across the country. We one of the things coming up, one of the projects coming up over the next couple of years is that we're going to be producing a felling and planting guidance for Northern Ireland. Now, this is in partnership with the Woodland Trust. We're just in the very initial stages of this. We've had a few meetings with Forest Service and the Environment Agency and things on this so far. There was a planting guidance on squirrels produced in 2014, so we're updating that and also including some felling information. The legislation is slightly different here to the rest of the UK, but we really just want to make sure our red squirrels are properly protected in this when felling operations are underway, and we also want to really make sure that there's a lot of new planting schemes and that these really take into consideration the possibility of the spread of grey squirrels or red squirrels. Sorry, my dog's barking if anyone can hear that. We as an organisation funded by the Environment Agency also carry out, we provide lantern training in grey squirrel control. So we have a bespoke Northern Ireland course. It's kind of similar to the UK one with just a few tweaks for Northern Ireland. So we actually developed a new version of that last year. And we are funded to carry out 2 of these a year. So yeah, we usually do that in the autumn winter time. And anyone that's interested, please just get in touch with me. The course is funded, so we actually provide it for free for people, yeah, which is great, and it's really useful. It covers, you know, everything from the ecology background and anything people want to know. We've had quite a few council employees come on board recently, which is very good, so we'd encourage more people like that to undertake the training. A few little positive things just to end on. We did some filming this year, so we're really trying to get red squirrels out in the media. We did some filming for local TV with the National Trust and managed to get these gorgeous little red squirrel kits on the TV, which was great, and just to highlight all of the work we do. And we just a few wee photos to show of pine martens at the end, and this, you know, you never know what you're going to see in these cameras, and it does make me laugh. And this family of pine martens provided us with a lot of entertainment. I think there is actually 4 of them, although you can only see 3, and I learned that the collective noun for pine martens is a richness of pine martens, which I thoroughly enjoyed and felt that this was a good picture to illustrate that. So yeah, they're one of the things that are popping up more and more on our cameras. And that's pretty much me. That is a very quick whiz through of everything we're doing, but I'll put a few links in the chat if anyone wants to find out more information. We are doing some events this week and various things. There's also a number of the volunteer groups are running events across the country, so you can find that out on our website, and we will just be encouraging people to submit sightings, please. Thank you.
Pressing the wrong button there. Thanks very much, Katie. That's excellent. And yes, lots of wonderful work going on in Northern Ireland. And do please, wherever you are in the UK, please report your sightings. There is a report sightings section on the UK Squirrel Accord website where you can find, wherever you are in the country, who you need to report them to. So, and now we'll go on to Chris Tucker from Natural Resources Wales.
Thanks, Kay. Afternoon, everyone. It's just turned 12 o'clock. Thanks very much for that, Kay. Yeah, my name is Chris Tucker. I'm a forestry advisor in Natural Resources Wales, but I'm also secretary of the Wales Squirrel Forum, so that's probably more relevant to this in my role as that. Okay, let's hope this presentation works. So we'll move on to the next bit. Yeah, lots been covered in the 3 talks already. So yeah, really good back. Lots of that information applies across the whole of the UK, doesn't it, in terms of the issues and impacts and relation. So I'll try not to go over that sort of thing. This is very much an update in that I'm going to start off by setting the background, as I did last year, for perhaps those people that weren't at the meeting last year, in terms of situation in Wales with red squirrels. So who are the Wales Squirrel Forum? It's a volunteer group, really, made up of organisations. It's not funded by anything. It's just the organisations and the individuals have put themselves forward to be part of the Squirrel Forum, because they've got an interest in squirrels in Wales. So we've been going, I'm guessing, around 20 years now as the Squirrel Forum, and you can see there the main purpose of the forum is to help encourage people to conserve red squirrel populations in Wales, manage the grey squirrels that are in Wales, both for red squirrel conservation and their impacts on woodlands and the woodland habitat, but also the woodland services that get provided. And we've got a role in coordinating, promoting the Red Squirrel Conservation Plan for Wales, which the forum wrote, and also the Grey Squirrel Management Action Plan, which is Welsh Government's grey squirrel approach. Yeah, we've got statutory bodies like Natural Resources Wales, Welsh Government, non-statutory organisations from various sectors. So we've got environmental NGOs, we've got CONFOR, which is Confederation of Forest Industries, Basque, and then local squirrel groups as well. So yeah, it's a real mix of people coming together to do what we can for red squirrels and woodlands in Wales. So the conservation plan, as I say, the Squirrel Forum wrote the plan. It's endorsed by ministers as well, which is great. So when we started to write it, you can see the map there. There were 8 areas where we thought that that red squirrels might still be around in Wales. So we did work to try to get an idea of the size of the populations and whether they were viable populations. And you can see from the map there that we've got currently, after developing the work that's gone over the last 15 years, we've got red squirrels on Anglesey, just red squirrels, which is great news. We've got reds and greys in Gwynedd, just across the Menai Straits from Anglesey, an area of upland forest in Clochainog in the northeast, and a large area in mid Wales, again in upland areas. There were a few smaller populations which back in 2008-9 we believe that still had red squirrels. So you can see those Cwm Mynach and Aberhirnant and Cynwyd and Nantir, just south of Clochainog. Very small woodlands, quite isolated, and we do keep an eye on those areas to see if we've got red squirrels in there, but very, very difficult. Further south, the areas in Brechfa and Rheola, yeah, we have failed to find red squirrels in those areas when we were developing the plan. So it's believed that they're no longer present there. As Mike's map showed you, apart from Anglesey, the rest of Wales has got grey squirrels present. So you can just assume that, no need to show it on the map. So how have we done since 2009? We reviewed the plan in 2018, and we have increased the number of 10 kilometre squares in Wales that red squirrels are present in, so that's great news. And we have got breeding populations in the 3 focal sites which we identified in that 2009 plan. So those are Anglesey, Clochainog and Mid Wales. So this is where we focus the conservation effort for red squirrels. There's a core area to the focal site and also then a buffer. So in the buffer that's where we try to do the grey squirrel control to keep the grey squirrels from moving into the core areas where the red squirrels are. So our review of the plan, pretty much the same, change the wording, the emphasis of it, but about maintaining and enhancing the range of red squirrels in those focal sites and where possible to expand them. So I'll look at the 3 sites now. In terms of Anglesey, yeah, great story in Anglesey with a reintroduction back in the 90s of red squirrels, and then a real focus on eradicating grey squirrels from the island, and that has been successful. really, really important to that is the participation of the communities, and you've heard it from the other speakers. Yeah, that is key, and I just see in the chat people talking about the involvement things. It's really important to get the local population aware of red squirrels, keen about red squirrels, and that has certainly helped on Anglesey and this morning. So decent sized population of red squirrels there, and they are moving on to the mainland. So we've got red squirrels on the mainland in Gwynedd now, around the Bangor area, and work is ongoing in those areas to help those populations. And that's where a lot of the grey squirrel control happens, to prevent greys getting onto the island. Squirrel pox is a concern, and we have had cases relatively recently on the mainland. So obviously that's a important thing to prevent that from getting onto the island into the main population. There are pine marten releases going on, so lots going on in Gwynedd and Anglesey area, and I'll mention a bit more about pine marten later. And then there's ongoing research into how best to manage the population, how best to manage woodlands and forestry on the island in relation where we've got the red squirrels present. So that's all lots of stuff going on with that. There has been earlier this year there was some grey squirrels found on Anglesey, and they were rapid response, very much like Nicole said in Scotland. That those were removed. Last time I spoke to the officers there, they were trying to make sure they got the last one, and tests are going on to those to see if they were a small breeding population or whether they had all come across as individuals, because they were in the same area. So it was an unusual thought that they would have all come across and then gathered in the same place. So there are occasional crossings over the bridge and even across the straits themselves, from across the water, but there is a focus on the island around people being aware and reporting those sightings of grey squirrels around the bridges that lead to the island of Anglesey. So that's the usual response, and they get picked up pretty quickly. Clochainog Forest, so this is I say northeast Wales, quite a large upland forest managed by Natural Resources Wales and some areas by the Welsh Water. It's managed using continuous cover, so we try to avoid clear fell and restocking systems. It's been a demonstration site for that method of forestry for quite a long time. It's been a red squirrel reserve for quite a long time as well, as you can see from the date there. The population has reduced, though. We're not sure if that was down to or whether squirrel pox virus played a part in that reduction. Not got any confirmation, but certainly the population has gotten down to a level where it's been of concern, and we are, along with Magical Mammals, doing a reinforcement project to boost those numbers. So we've had several reinforcements over the last 4 or 5 years, and that's ongoing with further reinforcements planned. We've got quite a few lessons in terms of how to do that. I mean, obviously, there's all the things we have to do to make sure that the animals you're introducing are healthy and free of any disease, etc. They've been kept in release pens for a period before the doors are opened, and then still fed around the pens but allowed to be free roaming, and then eventually they've dispersed into the forest. So it's quite interesting on that. But yeah, placement of pens and things like that has been a useful exercise, making sure that there's enough cover to prevent birds of prey, for instance, spotting the squirrels in the pen. So obviously that would cause stress to the animals. We carry out grey squirrel management in Clochainog Forest, and we do get pine marten frequently recorded on the cameras that are used for the monitoring there. And key again, we've got a partnership with the Clochina Red Squirrel Trust there. They're a relatively recently established charity that helps support with the monitoring and management of red squirrels and grey squirrels in and around the Clochina Forest. And they're a partner in the Magical Mammals project, which I will mention. I've mentioned it once, I'll tell you about that in a moment. So moving to Mid Wales, this is a huge area for us in terms of red squirrels. It's a huge area, but with a very low density of red squirrels. So it's very difficult to actually understand and monitor the population there. It's estimated that there's between 100 and 500, which over 15,000 hectares, as you can tell, is very low. But there are genotypes that have been recorded from red squirrels there, which are unique to that area. So it's not a reintroduced population. It's one that's always been there and has clung on. So it's really important to us. The Mid Wales Red Squirrel Partnership, which is led by the Wildlife Trust South West Wales, plus landowners. I mean, we again, Natural Resources Wales is landowner there, but we're not the only one. There are private forestry companies that manage woodland there, and they're engaged with the process as well. And there's lots of engagement with the communities. The partnership has a really good role there in terms of advising on the management of the forest. They do the monitoring, so that's where the forest managers get information to help plan their work. They also carry out grey squirrel control, and one of the gentlemen there is now doing the training through the Lantern training for other people to learn skills in grey squirrel control. So that's really positive. Last year we actually revised the area of the focal site, bringing in more communities to help with the engagement of more people within that area. So that was useful for the people running the partnership to be able to reach more people in the communities. So that was great. Last year there was a decline in numbers. Previous year, things haven't really picked up, but I say it's very, very low population, so it's difficult if the population has moved or expanded somewhere else within that big forest complex. It's quite difficult to pick that up. So but yeah, it was concerning as to why the numbers declined. But there have been no cases of squirrel pox reported. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that responds, and whether we do have to consider reinforcement there as well to retain that population. Obviously, there's a balance there, because we've got these unique haplotypes and genotypes in that population. So introducing others might be considered not the best thing. But on the other hand, if it helps to reinforce the population and increase the genetic diversity, then maybe it should happen. So things to consider. So mentioned Magical Mammals a couple of times. So it's a 5-year project, National Lottery Heritage Fund, focused in North Wales. So the partners are the Red Squirrel Trust Wales, the Clochina Red Squirrel Trust, and Natural Resources Wales. So that's working across the population areas up there, the focal sites in North Wales. So they're very much involved in the reinforcement project. And also reinforcement or introduction of pine martens in North Wales. So I mentioned some of that was happening in Gwynedd. So this project is looking at both red squirrel and pine marten as rare species in Wales to be managed. So in terms of the squirrels, we've just done the 3rd phase of the reinforcement project in Clochina. But modelling is saying that we should be enforcing with more. So we've put 10 in, and we've got another 10 coming over the next 2 to 5 years. So it's tricky business in terms of getting the individual animals to release, and the timing of things, and giving it the right time of year, etc., and all of the requirements that we need to do in terms of permissions. But yeah, it's so far it's a good project to help boost that population in Clochainog. Moving on to research, apologies, I haven't got nice maps like everybody else had of the focal areas, so perhaps that's a note for me next year to get some maps with the sightings, etc. So research-wise, there's various things going on. Natural Resources Wales is in the process of completing an evidence report on genetic diversity of the Welsh red squirrel populations. As mentioned, we've got some unique ones, and in total we've got 15 different haplotypes, genetic types recorded in Wales, 6 of which have been on Anglesey. So yeah, that'll be published fairly soon, and hopefully that will help to direct and look at how to manage those populations so that those haplotypes and that genetic diversity is maintained in the populations in Wales. The Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales are doing work with Aberystwyth University into the genetics of the Mid Wales population. That work has been, for several years. That work's been going on. So it's again understanding the population and whether there's movement in or out of it. Another piece of work which hopefully will be published fairly soon is commissioned by Natural Resources Wales into how to use records, actually camera records of low dense populations in these big upland forests. So 2 out of the 3 areas that we've got as focal sites are upland, conifer plantation type forests. So lower densities than we have in broadleaf forest woodlands on Anglesey. So how do we use the information that we get from recording, trapping all camera traps to help us to understand the density of the populations? So again, that piece of work will hopefully be published fairly shortly. It follows on from one that was published last year by Bangor University on how to estimate populations on Anglesey, where you've got higher densities. Squirrel pox virus has been mentioned more than once. Yeah, big concerns. As I said, we've had some cases up in Gwynedd, and we're not sure about Clochainog. There was a petition last year to the Petitions Committee of the Welsh Assembly to develop a squirrel pox antidote vaccine, and there was a debate in the Senate chamber about this time last year, September last year. From that, the recommendation was that the Wales Squirrel Forum should look into it into more detail, and we did have a discussion earlier this year in terms of how that might go forward. And Welsh Government has agreed to commission a feasibility study on whether it's possible to develop a vaccine against squirrel pox virus. So that needs to look at all of the various aspects, and you can see there that there's quite a lot of issues that relate to it, not just whether the actual virus would work and is possible, but the economic, financial, legal aspects around developing a vaccine. So we wait to see what Welsh Government come back with on that. Quite clearly, if there is something, if it's a possibility, then I'm sure discussions will need to take place between the 4 countries as to how people could benefit from that across the UK. Or the squirrels should benefit from that, I should say. Finally, legislation, a kind of less interesting side of the squirrel management, but yeah, something that's we talk about quite a lot in Wales. So under the Agriculture Act 2023, Natural Resources Wales, who do issue the felling licences in Wales, got extra powers to add environmental conditions to felling licences. And these came into force for April this year. So one of those conditions which we apply to felling licenses in the focal site areas. As you can see from there are sort of 3 things that on that condition that the forest manager has to ensure when applying their felling license. So key thing is around the breeding season. Not allow trees with drays and active drays to be felled during the breeding season. Secondly, the direction of felling. So don't do your felling operation so that it splits your woodland into 2 and animals can't move from one area to the other. So make sure that the design of the felling area is works so that you maintain connectivity and movement through the forest. And key when you're actually doing the work is to work towards the forest, not away, not out towards the edge, so that that ensures that any animals that are in the area can move into the forest and don't become isolated on the forest edge in the last few trees before you fell. So that is now applied to felling licenses where we've got the red squirrel focal sites in Wales. So that's a step forward in terms of making sure that those sorts of operations don't negatively impact where they don't need to. And finally, just a very short slide on policy. We've heard stuff around the various schemes and support in England and Scotland for grey squirrel management, particularly in relation to woodland grants. The sustainable farming scheme will be the new agri-environment scheme in Wales. That has been delayed. It will now start in 2026. The transition from the current support to the new one. The area where we are hoping that grey squirrel management will be included is a collaborative action. So this is where people who receive the grant work across landscape level to deal with whatever the issues might be. But in terms of red squirrels and particularly grey squirrel management, then we see that as being important to work at a landscape level, not an individual basis. So the actions and the things that will be available within the Sustainable Farming Scheme grant are yet to be developed. So they'll be looked at next year. Hopefully we'll be able to provide you with a bit more information next year on where that's going. I mentioned the Grey Squirrel Management Action Plan there. That's Welsh Government's plan on grey squirrels, which was published in 2018. So that's the other policy that relates to squirrel management, and you can find that on the Welsh Government website. And I think that's it, Kate. Yep. Thank you, everyone. Happy to take questions when we have the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Okay, we'll move over to the questions. And the first question is for Mike, going back to the very beginning. So Mike hasn't gone to sleep, maybe. No, I'm joking. Is Mike there? Yes.
I am, okay.
A long time ago, sorry, Mike. So Mike, you mentioned the lack of public awareness as a top challenge. What ways to increase awareness are seen to be the most effective?
I think public awareness on general is kind of dealt with at 2 levels. We have kind of national campaigns, such as big media campaigns, things like the work that UK Squirrel Accord's doing, things like was being done in each of the different regions of the UK. These big schemes are really important because they move the focus away from just red squirrel areas. We need support from across the whole of the country, especially when it comes to things like helping to influence policy and strategies across the board. Large organizations are normally very centrally governed. So getting that information to them across the whole of the country is really important. But also at a local level, if we're looking at things from local groups, then social media is a really big influencer nowadays. We undertook some work with a young people's forum, trying to understand what messages really kind of spoke to them, ways in which they could receive those messages. And social media is obviously a key communicating tool nowadays. So that is something we'd definitely say for people or individual groups to look into. There are some really good examples out there of volunteer groups using social media really effectively. So people like, at the top of my head, I'd say look at this Cramlington Red Squirrel group. They do amazing stuff on social media and really kind of reaching out to new audiences. And the UK Squirrel Accord social media, of course.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think, is it Cramlington that have got the Red Squirrel costume going out and around this week? So if you go on Twitter, they've got it in different places, so you have to guess where the squirrel is that day, and it's a bit of a competition. But I don't know whether anyone else wants to come in on that around awareness raising, communications work. No, I would just add to that, just to say that communications are so very important, and the more we can get out through local networks, through national networks, through membership magazines, through social media, through everyone's websites, and word of mouth is a really important one as well. If you're going out and speaking to anybody in your local area and you know pushing forward the need for grey squirrel management and red squirrel conservation, then that's great. Thank you. Another one for Mike, just going down through the list. You mentioned the lack of funding for volunteer groups being a top challenge. What are the main sources of funding that are currently used, and should government be looking to be doing more to support the funding gaps?
Yes, it is a current theme across everything squirrel related. Two kind of elements to this again. There is more kind of small scale local funding, maybe more suitable for small volunteer groups. There are things like local community funds, things like the co-op. There are a lot of organisations that actually have local community funds that are available. You can look to companies within your local area, individual donations and things like that. Moving out to kind of a wider scale, there's national funding available, things like the Species Recovery Fund, the National Lottery. The Red Squirrel Recovery Network project I mentioned is a large national lottery project. However, they've said to us from the start, they're really still encouraging smaller and other lottery applications as well. So certainly those are the areas people should be looking in. And really, I do support the countryside stewardship. The WS3 element of it is making a huge difference to red squirrel conservation. And what I'd like to see is those landowners with the funding linking up with some of the volunteer groups. And so that funding is kind of flowing right through to support the groups themselves.
Definitely. I've heard it said a few times that the WS3 grant is the most secure source of funding for that work in England, certainly at the moment, if people can link up with the landowners that can engage and
we do have to caveat that, because obviously the scheme is, you know, will be reviewed for next year. So hopefully before Christmas we will have details on the new scheme, and hopefully it will continue, maybe even improve the support currently provided.
Definitely. Thanks, Mike. Does anyone have any recommendations for funding in their country areas?
I can maybe jump in for Scotland. So similar to what Mike was saying, it's definitely a pervasive issue, especially for the independent operating volunteer groups. There are loose equivalents of many of the things that he mentioned. So there are various small scale funding and community funding models available throughout Scotland based on the region. We also have, there's a separate Scottish lottery fund that similarly will accept very small projects or large scale projects, as our project has previously been funded through lottery funding as well. We also have the forestry grant scheme. I would say it's currently undergoing quite a bit of revision. For those that are familiar with the Scottish budget position, it's likely to see some difficult decisions that have to be made this year around what gets funded, but where it is available and where landowners can apply, it's an incredibly useful funding source to help provide control on the ground and increase that capacity for particularly estates and other landowners. We also have in Scotland, there's quite a few opportunities through local wind farm mitigation measures and those sorts of funding pools that are available to groups. And then we've been working on some community funding and investment models, particularly with some of our parks in the south, but we're hoping with time that will be able to replicate and eventually pass on to help support some of the groups in the south, particularly with the South Scotland groups. The volunteer forum that's kind of oversees a lot of those organizations is really a great point of contact for getting in touch with some of the local groups that have been really successful in fundraising. And they're a great first port of call. You can find their details via our website or directly we can pop it in the chat there, their direct line.
Thanks very much, Nicole. I know you mentioned the wind farms, and I know there can be grants accessible through the landfill schemes as well, can't there, around the country? So that's another one to look into. And there are various smaller grant making organizations out there and some of them are very specific to certain areas. They're very specific to the north of England or Wales and so it's worth having like scouting out those kind of local and smaller grant making bodies as well. Does anyone else want to come on this or
Obviously, we come in and say that, yeah, I agree, it's very difficult funding. It's always an issue that we're looking at. We don't have a woodland grant scheme in Wales presently. Mentioned the sustainable farming scheme, which will hopefully have woodland elements to it. But yeah, it's we wait to see what comes from Welsh Government on grant funding that would support grey squirrel management and red squirrel conservation. Yeah, the projects we have, I mean, I mentioned the Heritage Lottery one, Magical Mammals, but yeah, we've had various success over the years through our ENGO partners mainly, managing to get grants from various sources, but it's always sort of, yeah, time limited, isn't it? So 3 years, 5 years if you're lucky, and then you're looking for the next money to carry on supporting the project. So it is a real concern in terms of the longevity and yeah, this sort of work needs that long-term approach, doesn't it? So,
yeah, nature in general needs a long-term approach.
Yeah.
Katie, did you want to come in at all?
Yeah, just I agree with everything, and we're the same, lots of different little small pots of money that the groups are chasing quite often. We try when we can to get central funding for us that we can support the groups with. So that's something we have done, like we provide the lantern training for free. We try and get money for things like feed and equipment every so often so that we can provide that for the groups and support them. But yeah, it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Yeah, someone did put in the chat that that many large companies and general companies have community or environmental schemes, so it's worth looking into what companies that you have locally and trying to partner up with them. There's quite a few philanthropists out there that like supporting conservation and environmental charities. It's maybe just a case of really researching that in your local areas, but it is an issue, certainly. There's a question here about pine martens in Great Britain. Mike, you've clicked that you were happy to answer that live, so I'll pass that on to you.
Yes, no, definitely. I did quickly add a slide to my slide deck, if I can share that. So basically, pine martens, a lot of the other people here today have mentioned pine martens. And pine martens in England is something that we are increasingly becoming aware of, and we are increasingly seeing pine martens naturally moving into areas of woodland that they weren't there before. Let me just share this. There's been a lot of research work, especially in Northern Ireland and Scotland, on the impact of pine martens, positive impact on red squirrels, a negative impact on grey squirrels. And as you can see, the distribution of pine martens in the UK, I'm not sure the date of this map, but we are definitely seeing pine martens coming down from the north of south of Scotland into northern England. We are working to increase the monitoring for pine martens. We're sharing the information that we get whilst out doing squirrel monitoring with dedicated pine marten projects such as Martins on the Move, but also just to share. Oh, sorry, my screen's died. This is 2023 monitoring undertaken in Kielder Reservoir, around Kielder Reservoir. And all those spots there are sites on which pine martins were seen. So this is over a 2-week period. And it's definitely not the same pine martin running around the reservoir all the time. So we can definitely say there are pine martins moving into England without the actual introductions. Now, there are a number of introductions being undertaken across England. And as I say, research, I mean, Josh Twining did a lot of research around the impact of pine martins and concluded that there was no negative impact on red squirrel populations, which is something that we have seen in Kielder.
It's quite amazing how far they actually travel once they reach an area and how far they spread out across the landscape. Did anyone else?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just agreeing with you there, Kay. Yeah, the Vincent Wildlife Trust had a reintroduction to mid Wales. Several years ago now. I think it's sort of 7 or 8 years. And yeah, they were collared initially, radio collared, and yeah, straight away one went all the way up to North Wales. You know, massive range. Within no time at all, that individual was in North Wales. And you can see that on Mike's map there that the sort of most of mid to North Wales has got records of sightings there, and I think that's due to yeah, they do have a really good big range, don't they? So but yeah, we've got them in as I mentioned, Clochainog, and the Mammals Martins on the Move project that Vincent Wildlife Trust are running is looking to monitor populations. So yeah, we should be getting some more information on that in terms of getting good data.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Are they? Somebody was saying to me the other day, and I'm not sure this is true, but are they in all counties in Wales now, or thought to be?
Oh, they asked me. I don't know if they're in Pembrokeshire.
No, right.
And probably not some of the valleys ones. You know, the South Wales.
Not quite there yet.
Right. I don't know. I mean, certainly, they're in South Wales and in mid and north. Yeah, whether they're in West Wales, I'm not sure.
No.
But yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the information when it comes from the Martins on the Move project. So that's yeah, relatively new project, just getting up and going. So
yeah, thanks, Chris. And I know in Northern Ireland they've had made a significant impact.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think suppose we have to understand that, you know, with the spread of pine marten, you can then get some conflicts that arise with a predator spreading, and that's something we all have to be aware of, and conflict resolution. And you know, they predate chickens and they start to den in people's houses, and this is something that we definitely have to deal with. Of course, we welcome the spread of them, but I think we can't ignore that fact. So Vincent Wildlife Trust and the Northern Ireland Environment Agency here have great guidance on that, and you know, how to farm proof your from pine martens and all sorts of things. So I think we just have to be aware of that. We also do get some concern from the squirrel groups. You know, pine martens are going to wipe out the reds, but we have seen that on a landscape scale that they are having positive impacts. We know that they do predate reds as well as greys, but you know, because they've a native and everything, we know that they can coexist perfectly, and that's what we have seen in Fermanagh, a really high population of reds and a really high population of pine martens coexisting fine. And that also only works when we have good habitat and enough of a woodland network as well, so that's key to the whole thing too. We could talk all day about pine marten and this relationship, I think.
I'll just pass over to Nicole, because I know there's been a lot of work done in Scotland as well.
Yeah, I'll very quickly echo just about everything that Katie just highlighted. In Scotland, we obviously have quite high pine marten populations, and in many areas increasing, which is great to see, but it definitely comes with challenges and concerns that shouldn't be ignored. If we have time, Kay, I can do a very quick show and tell to show some of that data. We're not quite as far as we want to be just yet, but some of these pieces about better having our data. So I mentioned in my presentation some of our dashboard work that we've been developing to better visualize. And one of those is around our feeder box monitoring. So what you're seeing on the screen just now are our pine marten detections that we have not necessarily specifically gone out to get, but through our other monitoring work across the country, we pick up quite a lot of pine marten detections. And what's really interesting is we can look at the co-occurrence of those with red and gray squirrel. So all the dots you're seeing just now, I'll focus on kind of our northern regions, are where we've had pine marten detections at a feeder. But we can look at, so it's going to, these sites here, just a few green dots are where you have both pine martens and gray squirrels going to the exact same feeder, compared to where you have pine martens and red squirrels going to the same feeder. And you can see that you get a lot more co-occurrence with both species, with both reds and pine martens, and we don't quite see that with the grays. So there's a lot of data to unpack there, but yeah, just a little tidbit of some of the kind of fun stuff we've got on the horizon with that end.
Excellent. All that evidence is very, very valuable.
Sorry, I was going to say our data shows a very similar thing. We don't have that many areas now. We're both pine martens and greys, and we have a lot more areas of pine martens and reds, which is really, really interesting.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. There's a question for Katy, I think. Why is Fermanagh grey free? Is it the topography of land or active control of greys?
We were just talking about the pine marten.
Yeah.
Pretty much. There's a couple of things. Up until it was only 10 years ago, County Fermanagh was full of grey squirrels in the town and urban areas, and now they've completely gone. And pretty much 99% of that has been pine marten. There's been very little control in Fermanagh, which is very interesting. Now, this does not work everywhere, of course, but we have seen that happen. The main reason is because it's the most heavily wooded and forested county in Northern Ireland. It has a lot of lovely oak woodland left. Really kind of healthy woodland there, which has made a huge difference. So now we're seeing it's basically the place in the country would have the highest density of red squirrels and the highest density of pine marten. We think really that's where pine marten were kind of hanging out. You know, whenever pine marten had kind of disappeared from most of the country, they were still kind of existing at low densities in Fermanagh, just kind of where most of them have kind of spread out from. So that's the main thing. And then at this stage, because people are basically on the alert, so grey squirrels will come in very occasionally, but they are removed just to make sure that they don't establish themselves again.
Yeah. Thanks, Katy. And they're very much, as you say, that as pine marten's moved into an area, you have really seen the removal of, well, the grey squirrels moving out of those areas, but red squirrels very much taking back over.
This is amazing.
It is amazing, yeah. Mike, did you want to come?
Just quickly, actually, one point was interesting is that I believe that in England and Scotland, it's slightly different to Ireland in that the abundance of small mammal species within the woodland is something that isn't present in Ireland. So I think it has been thought that pine martens will have a lot more other things to eat as opposed to red squirrels once they finish all the grey squirrels.
Yeah, I think that was something that Josh Twining was talking about in a previous webinar that we held, that there's a vole population in Great Britain that's quite a big part of the pine marten diet that doesn't exist in Northern Ireland for them to rely on.
Yeah, it makes up a big portion of their diet in England, Scotland, Wales, and we don't have native voles. Now we do have invasive bank voles in the Republic of Ireland, but not in Northern Ireland. And I think what the data's shown is that actually their diet's a lot more varied. They eat a whole host of different things, and grey squirrel when they did some analysis of scats, grey squirrel made up a bit of that, you know, and they definitely find more grey squirrels than red squirrels, but a whole host of things, berries, beetles, just everything basically.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Another one for an Ireland question, around the cooperation between Ireland and Northern Ireland for red, grey pine marten survey and management.
Yeah, I mean, so we got together on an all Ireland basis in 2019 to do the All Ireland Squirrel Survey. So that's available. That was kind of the last time we did an Ireland-wide thing. I suppose it's a very valid point. Squirrels don't know anything about the borders, but unfortunately our funding does, and the politics does. So you know, at the minute we have a strategy for Northern Ireland. There is no strategy for the Republic of Ireland. I would really like to have an All-Ireland strategy. We do some work on the borders itself. So we work closely with like the Donegal Red Squirrel Group and some of the groups, and there's a squirrel group in Monaghan. So this is important for kind of greys going across the border. So we are in touch with MPWS and things on that work. Our funding unfortunately only allows us to work in Northern Ireland, but this could be something we have discussed it in the future to try and get an All-Ireland strategy.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Katie. And the Northern Ireland strategy came out last year, didn't it? So
yeah, 2022 actually now. Would you say?
2022? Gosh,
I know.
time go.
Time's gone quick.
Thanks, Katie. There's a question here around how much sea there is between Anglesey, the Isle of Wight, etc., and the mainland, and is that an issue? Will they continue to roll up regardless of a long, cold swim or a boat ride?
Yeah, the Menai Straits separate Anglesey from mainland Wales. It's less than a mile. I don't know the exact length, but yeah, I mean they have been seen swimming in the Straits, grey squirrels, but the actual just going across the two bridges that link Anglesey to the mainland is the usual way that they come across, but so it's not very far at all, not as far as the Isle of Wight.
And there's a lot of there is a lot of vigilance in Anglesey, isn't there, around local people?
Yeah, absolutely.
And reporting them as soon as they see them, whether they've swum over. And I have seen pictures of them in the sea in the Menai Straits swimming around. So
which is quite a strong current. So yeah,
it's
amazing.
And then Mike, there was that one that was washed up onto the Isle of Wight, and I know it may have just kind of been washed up on there, and I haven't heard of any mainland the Isle of Wight. Although I have heard a couple of people threatening, maybe is the word, to take grey squirrels over to the Isle of Wight and introduce them, which has been a bit worrying at times. I don't think, but no grey squirrels have ended up there at the moment. Yeah. But yeah, I think the Isle of Wight is quite a long distance, although they are rodents, and like rats, they are quite capable of swimming. So you have to be vigilant, and if basically reporting any red and grey squirrel sightings anywhere in the country is really, really helpful. Can you track release squirrels? Are GPS chips small enough? I know they're well, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of GPS tracking on them. I don't know how heavy that would be, and radio tracking would be too big, I'm guessing. But no, we don't try to track them.
No, in Scotland there's been some radio done.
Was that?
There's been some radio collaring of red populations around the impacts of forest operations. So that's been led by Louis Sturrod and the University of Highlands and Islands. I believe we'd have to kick this over for Trees for Life, who lead on the reintroduction work in the Highlands. As a general practice, they don't radio track the squirrels that they release. That's done with follow-up monitoring. However, they may have done previously, or in some of the reintroductions, they may have done some isolated testing with radio collaring, but I don't know that data is available. But worth getting in touch with Trees for Life for more information.
Yeah, I know with APHA for the fertility control work, looking at the feeders and trying to assess what can and cannot get into the feeders. They did do some chipping work for that. So there was a reader and in the squirrel once they chipped them, the grey squirrels, to see how many times they were going into the feeder, how much feed therefore that individual squirrel was taking, to have a look at the bait uptake and things. So yeah. Chris, are there any plans to investigate the cause of population decline in mid Wales, and has anyone looked into how the squirrels respond to cone crop cycles?
That's a good question. Yes, I mean the project owner are keen to try to understand why the population seems to have. It was interesting when in that there was one area of the site where they were getting good recordings and sightings, and then all of a sudden they weren't getting any. So it was very strange, and that was nearly 2 years ago. So yeah, that was the conundrum there. But yes, coning cycles obviously in upland wood forestry is affects the food supply, doesn't it? So yeah, that's something they will be looking at. But yeah, they are keen to look into it. It's just trying to understand the dynamic between all of these different aspects, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think so long. I think it's about the kind of reinforcements, and given that the red squirrel is a relatively short-lived mammal, is a reinforcement of 25 enough?
That's a good question, and I have to say I don't know the answer to that. The Magical Mammals Project has done the modelling, so one assumes they've taken into account the lifespan and when they will be then, how soon they will breed, etc. Yeah, I can't answer that. I've not got the insight into the modelling on that, but it has been modelled. It's not just it is planned.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And that's to help with reinforcements and genetic diversity and all sorts of things, isn't it? So,
yeah.
Can you, Chris? Can you just talk about the Welsh felling line conditions that have come in red squirrel forests and other areas?
Yeah. So I saw the questions there. I can't remember the details anywhere. Yeah, I mean the easiest way to avoid felling a tree with an active dray in it is not to fell during the breeding season. So that's a recommendation from the Squirrel Forum. But there are complications in terms of proving that a dray is active, etc. And we probably all know it's very difficult to find drays sometimes in high forest, and B, to understand whether they're active and what they're active with. Is it red or grey that's using that dray? Yeah, very difficult situation. But yeah, it's where we know we've got red squirrels. We want people to really consider that and consider the timing of their operation. But that didn't get through into the actual condition.
Forestry operations in England with the Forestry Commission recently, and that was it looked at various things, but it also looked at kind of new technology and the use of things like thermal to identify active drays.
Yeah, sorry, break it up a bit there, but yeah, using thermal imaging, yeah, you'll be able to identify a heat source. Does a squirrel give off enough of a heat source, and you won't be able to tell if it's a red or a grey, would you, from the heat source?
No.
So sorry, lost you. The sound just went. It might be my end. Apologies.
Can anyone else hear me?
Yeah, I got you now.
Okay. A bit worried. Katy, a question for Katy. Hopefully this works. Do you work actively with the game bird industry in Northern Ireland to reduce persecution of pine marten?
I suppose no. I mean, we do work with a number of landowners and things on that issue. We know that persecution happens. So I mean, I suppose we wouldn't work directly with them. The problem is nobody's going to tell you that they're persecuting pine marten, are they? So no one is admitting to actually doing it. Although we do know that it happens. Another species work on our barn owls, so we work with a lot of farmers there, and this issue comes up a lot. So of course, yeah, it's something we have to deal with, and I think through this kind of awareness raising, making people aware of the law and legislation, but also we've seen a change in some people's attitudes when we show how much of a positive impact pine martens are having on red squirrels, and we have actually seen that from landowners, and I've had people off the record say to me, oh, well, I'll stop shooting them now. So it's definitely, I think it's our job to kind of raise awareness on that and but also deal with those problems too.
Yeah, thanks, Katy. And there are definitely ways that people can get around the pine marten issue, building pine marten proof, enclosures and things like that, aren't there?
Of course, yeah, there's lots and lots of measures, and some of them are really simple now. And I think it's just making people aware of that.
Thank you. I think that it's quite a lot of the questions that have been asked. There's one on around pine martens versus domestic or feral cats, and will the pine martens be predated on or move away from cats? Will they fight with cats? If anybody knows, I know they're not pine marten experts here, so we might not know. I haven't heard about it personally. No, maybe something we can go back and find, or I can go back and find out. So
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't heard that. I mean, obviously we've had a few instances of feral cats predating red squirrels in some of our areas. But I've never, no, I haven't had any evidence of that. But who would know?
no, I might ask Josh and find out about that. But
Yeah.
I personally haven't heard anything about feral cats or being an issue to pine marten. I think pine marten would probably be a bit savvy to the feral cat, to be honest. But that's excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Does anyone have any last thoughts before I wrap up? Any advice for people? No, I would just like to please ask people to please do keep sending in your squirrel sightings, and especially if you see a sick and injured squirrel anywhere in the country, do report that, especially if it's a red squirrel, and people will be able to help you and do something about it. That'd be great. And I hope you've enjoyed this webinar, this 2024 catch up on what's going on in the world of red squirrels around the UK. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thank you to you for coming. We do have another webinar tomorrow looking at red squirrel reintroductions or reinforcements, sorry, in Clerkenwell Forest. Lots more coming this week. So do get involved, and I will see you soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.